Dr. Jazz.
But man, thanks for finding the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for reaching out.
You
Appreciate
know,
you doing that.
yeah, I've done this talk with many guys you've played with, and I went the other day through my CDs, and I was like, man, here's a guy to talk to who I haven't done the talk yet. So, and but I just wanted to jump in. I wanted to ask you, I've studied literature and poetry, and one of the last things you've done is this collaboration with Robert Pinsky, and I've been a fan of American poetry for a long time, and obviously Robert Creeley did the stuff with Steve Swallow way back, like late 70s, early 80s. How did this association with Robert begin for you, and how did you approach the last one?
When you say the last one, you mean the most, which one are you talking
Yeah, the
about? The
Proverbs of Limbo. That
Proverbs, oh,
yeah,
okay, so
yeah,
you've
like
heard,
2 years ago. Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful, man. I love it, and
pretty
the
cool, right?
band is killing.
It's pretty cool. Okay, so I met Robert because there's a gentleman who's a good friend named Richard Conley,
Mhm.
and he's from Nyack, New York, which is sort of one of the epicenters of the Hudson Valley arts. You know, Edward Hopper, who painted Nighthawks, was
Yeah.
from Nyack. Jasper
Oh, yeah.
Johns from Nyack. Richard grew up there. He's a real interesting character himself. He used to hang out at the Brill Building. He knew Doc Pomus and all these people. And has an independent publishing concern, which mostly had issued books,
Hmm.
but also issued some CDs, including the Poem Jazz CDs. And I met Richard because he published in around 2003, maybe something like that. He published a book of lyrics by the singer that I am known for having worked with for a long time.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, I figured you might want to ask about that.
Yeah, yeah.
So he knew that Kurt um, felt strongly that I had a special aptitude for accompanying spoken word, because
Mm,
spoken
yep.
word was something that Kurt was into, especially in the early years when
Yeah, yeah.
Kurt was still, doing interesting and hip stuff. Um, and maybe Richard had discerned that himself by just seeing live performances. And he knew that Robert had this interest in a certain non-hokey,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, actually artistic, interesting, complex approach to that. And I will say, I'm not sure how much you know about this, although I'm guessing you might have checked out a bio or something like that. But my father was a theater scholar.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I didn't read anything about
Oh, okay,
you
good,
too
good.
much. Just that I'm surprised always. I try to.
Sure. So my father was a pretty famous theater teacher in university here in the States. He founded a program at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, which is where we moved when I was 4.5 years
Mm,
old. He had just completed his PhD at Cornell. And then about 11 years after we moved to Dallas, he got lured away to Illinois to they wanted to see how SMU is a private school and smaller enrollment. Illinois is a huge Big Ten state school.
Sure.
And so that they operate a little bit differently. Anyway, I don't want to wander down that path. The point is that if indeed I have an aptitude for accompanying spoken word and sort of having a sense of that, I personally think that having a very deep grounding in literature and indeed poetry. I mean, I came from an arts family. My dad was a Shakespeare scholar, Stanislavski scholar, as a sort of an aside, I will just mention that one of my little I guess issues in jazz, and this is there's no one correct answer to this, but that jazz attitude that is maybe best embodied by the anecdote of someone asked Louis Armstrong, what is swinging really? Like what, as opposed to like something is swinging or it's not swinging. However they asked the question, but his answer famously was, if you have to ask, I can't tell you. Which
Yep.
promoted this idea that there's sort of a mystery. You either know how to feel it or you don't. I hate that. I hate that. And the reason is because a mistake that jazz musicians make very frequently, and the more brilliant that they are musically, and I'm not saying they're not, I'm saying they are, there may be musical geniuses, but they make that fairly common human error of thinking that because they're really, really amazing at this one thing, that they know more than they do about something else. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of musicians, particularly jazz musicians, are not particularly articulate with language.
Yep.
So that then becomes a sort of a suspicious source for saying, well, you can't really describe it. There's no way to say what it is. And that's just short of saying, well, either you know or you don't. It's a mystery, like that. And it's like, well, yeah, I don't know. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Do I believe that ultimately you have to feel it?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's just like the bicycle analogy. You can tell somebody a lot about what's going to happen, but yeah, they're going to have to find that balance and that coordination themselves. Yep. Yeah, of course, it ultimately comes down to that. But to say that there's no reason in even trying to describe or use language is just overly simplistic and frankly kind of stupid. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I know what you mean.
From my point of view. So anyway, you can see how all of these feelings influence the poem jazz thing. So to get back to that, Richard introduced Robert and me at a gig at Sculler's Jazz Club in Boston, because Robert lives in Cambridge. And 2 weeks later, we were in the recording studio making the first poem jazz.
Oh, wow, man. Okay.
Having just met and having not really discussed anything or whatever. And the main thing about that's interesting is that in that session, like I said, because of the way I grew up, there was always poetry. I'm not going to say I was, I'm not one of these people that became absolutely obsessively entranced with poetry from a young age, but I read poetry. I knew who Robert was, but now that I was going to be interacting with him directly, I was like, shit, I got to get my shit together here.
You did your studies, yeah.
And so I crammed, actually, I had already started doing it when we met because I knew we were going to do this, right? So we got into the studio, and because I had studied his poetry so deeply, albeit for a brief period of time, getting ready for this project, I had all these ideas about, for instance, what the poems meant and what they, you know, what the textual implications were. I had already gotten a feeling for, and this is true, a lot of Robert's poetry varies from being extremely abstract,
yeah, to very,
to being
yeah,
just shy of prose, and in some cases very autobiographical. A lot of his poems, he'll tell you, are recounting aspects of his life that it's almost not poetry at that point, except that with Robert it always is poetry because of the way that he puts
exactly.
words together, right? So anyway, we got into the session, and there were some tracks from that very first day that did go on the record. So it's not like we were wasting time, but the point is I was a little too focused on the literal meaning, or so what I thought it was. So at one point we took a little break, and Robert basically suggested that that I think less about that stuff, and that I think more about just the sound. And of course, I didn't know at that point, I hadn't read his book about the sounds of poetry. He wrote a whole book about that it's the sounds of the words. In other words, it's the musicality of the poetry that, which is why, for instance, he encourages people, if you're going to sit on a quiet Saturday afternoon and spend an hour reading some poetry, read it out loud.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Hear the sounds of the words, because that's where the full magic of it lies in that. So anyway, so we're in the studio, and he says this thing about, you know, maybe just listen to the sound of it more. And it was just sort of like everything finally clicked, you know. And we proceeded to have a great, you know, 2 or 3 days, I can't remember, making that first record. And then to jump to your question about Proverbs, in the intervening time since House Hour, we had in gigs, we had particularly worked a lot with Stan Strickland.
Yeah, yeah. How did you meet Stan, by the way? I love Stan's playing. You know, he's such an underrated player, man.
He's a Boston staple, teaches at Berkeley, and you know, there's a scene up there. Like, you know, it almost reminds me a little bit of Chicago, where I spent 20 years. And there's some amazing players in Chicago, but it's a sort of an isolated scene, you know, and not that many people break out of it. My impression is that Boston is a little bit like that, but obviously Berkeley is there. So that's a thing. Anyway, Stan, multi-instrumentalist. When he sings, he's got this husky sort of African thing happening, you know, and it's just really cool. John Lockwood, the bass player,
he's monster.
Just fantastic, intuitive musician. So we had worked with both of them quite a bit. And the tracks that Robert did with Mino Sinelu, that was totally separate, which is why they're totally separate on the record. There was a lot of sort of, like, you know, business politics there with the Mino thing. And he did do one gig with us in Boston, but and he's an amazing musician. But, you know, if you want to, and I'm sure you have plenty of experience with this too, which is that deeper subject of the mercenary aspect of the business.
Yeah, sure.
As opposed to musicians, including perhaps musicians of renown and stature, who sincerely want to engage. You know, it's not always about the bottom line and maximizing however much they think they should be able to make because of who they are and everything like that. It's more like, is this something I'd like to do? And would I be willing to invest a little bit in it in ways that is not connected to how much I'm being paid? You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think you can tell what I'm saying from
absolutely. But,
not trying to diss Mino. It's just, you know, he didn't want to be part of the team, as I define that. But anyway, Then I'll tell you another really interesting thing about that session where it was just me, Stan, and John and Robert. And this gets into the whole question, the whole question of well, to put it in a very succinct title, arrangements or not.
Yeah, yeah.
What kind of, which is like saying, what kind of game plan do we want to have going into something? You know, whether it's a recording or playing a live set or whatever. What's the approach in terms of, you know, jazz musicians tend to be a little bit overly impressed with themselves in terms of their ability to be spontaneous and come up with ingenious improvisational stuff. And when I say overly impressed, what I really mean to say is I'm not shorting them on their improvisational spontaneous genius. So that frequently that is the most important and palpable thing. But to say, especially from trying to put something together that's going to appeal to an audience, right? To say that the best jazz will always just be that, you know. And so, and listen, given my track record and what it is that I'm known for, it's not surprising that I'm pro arrangements. And, you know, although that said, situations where there are absolutely no arrangements, if it's the right type of that situation with the right musicians, I love that. I love free playing, which is really weird because most people wouldn't guess that I was even any good at it, because I'm associated with having with doing charted, notated arrangements and stuff like that.
But you did with Brian and Paul, that early State of the Union. I mean, there's a lot of free playing there, man. I mean, that's
absolutely, and I love that. But I also love the challenge of what is essentially scripting for jazz is a fascinating challenge for me. You know, let's take people that are really good at being spontaneous and inventive and imaginative and improvisatory, and let's give them a little bit of a framework. Because like, so for an example, why I think it's important to do that, I've heard a lot of musicians over the years who, when I first started listening to them, and I'm talking about in live situations, I mean, they knock my socks off. They're amazing, you know. But then you get to the fourth tune of the set, and you realize that they're playing the same thing on every song. They've got this bag of tricks, and it's a very impressive bag of tricks. Okay, but it's kind of cookie cutter, apply it to everything sort of thing. And I find that doing what I would call a real arrangement, you know, where you've really reimagined something, or just to say it, you know, I teach arranging at the New School, and one of the things I tell the kids in the very first week is most people's concept of what the word means is wrong. Because this idea that we associate the word arrangement or arranging with pre-existing material, and we call new material a composition or songwriting or whatever. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you think about it, everything gets arranged.
Sure.
You know, if somebody's a songwriter, whether they're like a country songwriter with a guitar and they're writing lyrics, or, you know, very few, only the really elite jazz composers would think about actually being in score from the beginning of an idea. You know, it usually involves coming up with a basic melody, the core idea of the tune, whether it's got lyrics or not. the core idea of the tune is usually like, you know, one person with a keyboard or one person with a guitar or whatever. And then when they decide, okay, now how am I gonna, what's the instrumentation?
Yeah.
And is there going to be an introduction? One of the things I ask my class is, how much music do you listen to? Think about it. How much music do you listen to where the very first thing that you hear is the first note of the melody? And they think about that, and of course they say, well, like almost none at all. And I said, yeah, there's always some sort of setup. We call it an introduction or a lead in or whatever you want to call it. That's arranging. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's you basically deciding a little bit in advance what's going to happen. And so the line between arranging and composition is very blurry, and the more imaginative the arranging gets, I mean, I'll even be, I know this sounds arrogant, I don't mean it to, but there are some arrangements that I've done where maybe because the song in question, the original version, was just, you know, incredibly simple, like a country tune, you know, or something like that, where I would argue that the arrangement that I've done is quite a bit, I hesitate to use the word better because that's too broad, you know, but certainly more interesting, or more
recomposing kind of, in a sense. I mean,
yeah, exactly, that whole recomposing thing. So anyway, as this applies to Proverbs of Limbo, I had communicated with Robert a lot going into that session about, here's the way we decided to do it. I didn't really write anything in advance. Maybe one or two things. But what we had done was we had talked about what poems we were going to record and what the vibe should be for that poem. Also with it in mind that, you know, you want stylistic variance on a record.
Yep.
It's the same reason you don't do like 2 or 3 ballads in a row when you're playing a set of music. It's like you need it to, you need it to move, right? But the truth of the matter is, most of what we did on there, I wrote in the studio.
Oh, wow.
We would start playing a little bit and we'd hit on something that worked. And then everybody would take a little bit of a break, usually very short. And I would take 5 or 10 minutes, no more than that. And I had manuscript paper. Or did I do? Yeah, I did some manuscript paper. But I remember I did some in Sibelius too, because I was emailing the engineer who was printing some stuff out.
That's quite cool.
And so that's, you know, and this has come up in live performances. There's a wonderful cellist she's not on the record, and the main reason is because she just couldn't make the session. Robert was open to the idea of having her on the record, named Catherine Bent, and she is a formidable, wonderful musician. But the first time that we played live,
you did live gigs,
with this was the gig in Boston that Mino played on live. Catherine was there. It was so Stan, John Lockwood, myself, and Robert. So there were 6 of us on stage, and I brought these little. What I had done now was take what we did on the record, and I had gone into Sibelius and done nice little charts. And we're talking about things that are 8 bars long, 16 bars long. And I said to them, Catherine was especially resistant, but she wasn't the only one. These guys just, you know, they wanted to, I'm like, we're going to go up and we're going to play a set of music in front of an audience and leave it completely to chance that we're going to come up with cool stuff that's going to hold their attention. You know, let's hedge our bets a little bit. But what I said to them up front was, you know, these are starting points. These are templates, right? If in the middle of the thing it goes in a different direction, just everybody go with it. I'm not trying to control anything. And it's so funny, you can say that to musicians and it just doesn't register, you know. It's either no charts means freedom or charts means restrictions, right? Yeah. And then what ended up happening proved the theory. You know, it's like we had this amazing gig, and it turned out to be really good that we had these sort of decided starting points, because we seemed to the audience, we seemed like we had our shit together, you know, which we did. It's funny because we did this sold out show in Boston just in January, and it had been 2 years since that other one. And I went into that thinking, well, you know, that one worked so well, they're going to be cool with this now. But it was the same thing all over again. It was the same charts, you know, and they were all, well, how's this going to work? And blah, 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 blah. And but we did have a different, it wasn't Mino, it was a different drummer. God, what was his name? Francisco Mela, is that right?
Yeah, sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
Wonderful,
amazing player,
yeah. Incredible musician. But
completely different.
But completely different, and there was a Latin, there was an overt Latin vibe on this particular show, and he was extremely, as some of the studied, really, really brilliant Latin players that know the difference between all the different exact. Well, this is I'm forgetting the words, but you know, this is this groove and this is that groove, and it's either one or the other.
Yeah, clave or whatever, or
And you know what? I'm totally cool with all that stuff. I'm extremely respectful I'm respectful of anybody that's done legitimate deep study of something and has knowledge, okay? But on the other hand, I also know that it's possible to just say, we're going to play this tune and we're going to play it with a straight eighth note and not necessarily have to say more than that.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And it can still be really good. And sometimes with those guys, it can be a little bit like, well, no, you can't do that. It's got to be a particular thing. And so anyway, but that ended up being a great gig too. You know, I love the poem jazz thing. It's always a lot of fun. And Robert, I think I'm comfortable saying Robert has come to trust me a lot, my instincts about how things should go, because we've gigged quite a lot over the years. We've played many performances in all different parts of the country. Sometimes it's been just me and him, like the first 2 records, and other times when possible, especially on in New England, when we can involve the other musicians, especially Stan. So it's a great thing. I'm looking forward to the next record.
It's highly musical, you know, like because poetry and jazz, or it can be terrible, man. It's like it can get so boring, like one person reading. But you know, Robert is highly musical the way he, and obviously, you know, you're incredibly musically, all of you guys, just how you respond to him. And so it's nice to hear that. I will say that I hate, and I studied poetry for my PhD and MA actually, but I hate this sometimes, jazz and poetry, because it can be like, oh man, guys playing some jazz and the guy reading like, yeah, you know. But this is different. That's why I wanted to start this talk with this, because it's like lots of interaction and everything. So
I'll just say one more thing, which is I don't know if you know this, but Robert was a frustrated musician when he was
didn't
young.
know that. No, I didn't know that.
He played clarinet and alto sax. I'm pretty sure those are the 2 instruments that he played. And the short version of the story is that he finally realized that he just didn't have the talent to equal his passion. And you know, you have to make a living in life. You have to be able to pay the rent and put food on the table. And since he realized that he wasn't possessed of the musical talent to make that happen, he did the only logical thing he could do to have a more comfortable material existence. He went into poetry.
Yeah, I mean, lucky nowadays for us that he actually did it. So, but
For him, it worked out great,
Yeah,
right?
I could have gone from jazz to poetry. I think that's even one level worse than jazz is poetry.
Oh
I mean,
yeah. The only thing that could be any more challenging than that would be to become a modern dancer.
yeah, exactly,
That's the ultimate
exactly.
fringe art, American art form.
Yeah, exactly. No, no, but beautiful job you did. I mean, fantastic. I really love it. So,
Oh, thank you,
yeah.
thank you.
Lawrence, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned before Chicago, and how did you decide to move to Chicago and not to New York initially? And I mean, you made quite a big name on the Chicago scene then, you know. I mentioned Paul Wertico already, and I love that band, by the way. That's the first time I heard you.
Mm.
And what's the story there? You going to Chicago and becoming part of the scene there?
Well, I'll be completely honest with you, man. It was 1988. Like I said, so Champaign-Urbana, Illinois is about 2.5 hours south of Chicago. The University of Illinois is a huge school, so over 50,000 students.
Wow.
So it's a massive Big Ten school. Champaign-Urbana is a university town. Not that there aren't some other industry
Sure.
things there, but it was founded because of the university. And my dad, my family moved there. I very open about this. I never finished school. I did 2.5 years in the music program there, and one factor for me was that having grown up with a father who was in arts, academia, and administration, I had seen all of the petty ego shit and all the stuff he had to deal with. And I just was kind of over it, you know, when I started seeing it in the music program too. And the other thing, and this may sound, again, I don't like to sound arrogant, but sometimes you can't help it or whatever. You know, the theory classes, particularly, um, at that time at Illinois, the theory classes were taught by grad students in composition.
Mm,
And the Illinois composition program was very, very 20th century oriented, which I'm all into that. In fact, my ultimately my main mentor was a guy named Salamon, who was a composer of extremely, most people would say, avant-garde new music, you know.
yeah,
And so I was way into that, but the problem is that that's what the people that went there to study composition were into, and what I learned eventually and know very deeply now is that, you know, there's a big difference between being Arnold Schoenberg and inventing the matrix and the serial approach to composition at a point in his life where the whole reason he did it was because he was at the absolute apex of tonality,
yeah,
you know. And now you know, you've got young students, undergraduate age students that decide to focus on serial composition
yeah,
and 20th century composition who have absolutely no idea how tonal theory and tertian harmony, or however you want to say it, work. They don't know how to do that. So that was a big problem for me in my classes, was basically I knew way more than most of my teachers did about just functional harmony
Harmon, yeah,
and that kind of thing. And it was just very hard for me to deal with. And so finally, being sort of a purist and a little bit of a free spirit, I guess, back then, I was just like, you know, I'm doing something I don't believe in. You know, I'm going to get this. They had stuck me in music education, and the reason for that was because the unlike the composition program, the piano division was very, very classical.
mm,
And I had made the mistake of letting it be known that despite my whole life of classical training, I played classical music well, if not great, you know, but I played it well. That my eventual interest was in being a jazz musician. That's what I wanted to do. So that went against me politically. So I was technically getting a music education degree, and it just didn't matter to me. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. I quit school, but I stayed in that town because by the time that I quit school, which was about 1982, I was working.
Mm.
I had a trio that was working sometimes 2, 3 nights a week. There was an amazing little jazz club there that you may have read about called Nature's Table.
No.
Oh man, it was this young couple that inherited a little money, opened this. They wanted to have a 7-night-a-week jazz club
Wow.
that was a sort of a what I would call a granola crunchy kind of a healthy lunch little sandwich place during the day, and then at night they would have music, and that's where I cut my teeth. There were weeks when I played there, not every week, but there were weeks when I played there like 4 or 5 nights out of the 7 nights, and each one of those nights would be with a different group. But also being local, having gone to high school there, I had all sorts of connections that the university students didn't necessarily have for working. So I stayed, and I had a lot of people telling me, including some of my former professors that the ones I liked, that I remained close to. They're like, you need to go to New York. Well, New York was still a really scary place.
Yeah, back then. Yeah.
Then, I mean, I knew people that had gone to New York and they were like, yeah, I've been mugged. It's just what happens there. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I just don't need that in my life. And I thought about the West Coast, but Chicago was just 2.5 hours away. And the more that I went up there to hang out with friends that I'd made and stuff like that, the more I just liked it. So it was definitely the easier move. There's no way that I was going to stay in Champaign-Urbana. I never thought for a minute that I would just become a permanent student type, and there are those types, right?
Yeah, sure.
But it just took me a few years, like 6 years that I spent there, sort of honing my skills, I guess you'd say, leading a trio,
Sure.
getting a book together, so that by the time I moved to Chicago, things happened pretty quickly for me, because I was already more advanced than I would have been if I'd moved right away. And so, for instance, you mentioned Paul Wertico. Fell into playing with him fairly quickly. The other thing that happened, I don't know if this is interesting or not, but not that long after I moved there, I had a chance to get on a gig that was at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in downtown Chicago. It was from 4 to 7 in the afternoon, 6 days a week.
Ooh, okay, that's a good.
It wasn't what it
practice
was.
Gig.
It was with a sort of a David Sanborn, even Kenny G, saxophone player, and a drummer. And the keyboard player played bass. So I had 2 keyboards and I had to play bass. But the point was, it was 4 to 7 in the afternoon, 6 days a week. I was making more money than I ever had before, and I have my nights free.
Exactly. Yeah.
The reason this is important is because at that time in the Chicago scene, and I think this is probably true in any jazz scene, but you have to be able to participate in the scene, and having that gig enabled me to not need to do weddings on Saturday night that paid, more money. And I could go down and play for the door at the Bop Shop or the Get Me High Lounge, or that place that eventually became, what is my musical home of all, which is the Green Mill.
Green Mill, sure.
That's to this day, that's home. That's home for me musically, on the whole planet. I think it's the greatest jazz club in the world, and the guy that owns it, a very, very close friend. I've been playing there for 35 years now, and it's just that's the place. But I was able to prioritize the music over the money, and it was all because of that gig,
Yeah.
you know. And so that was a real stroke of fortune. And by the time that gig ended, and by that time I was playing with Paul, and we had a trio before the one with Brian Torf. We had a trio with he's still there. He's a great bass player in Chicago named Eric Hochberg.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was called Trio New. And we even made a record, but I don't think it ever got released. So that was the first playing I did with Paul. And then the trio with Brian happened. And of course, in 1993 is when I met Kurt Elling, and those situations dovetailed a little bit at first. You probably know Paul is on the first couple
Sure.
of Kurt's records. So it kind of went from there. And yeah, you know, by the time I'd lived in Chicago I moved there in 88. I met Kurt in 93, and we started touring in 95. So there were plenty of reasons to stay in Chicago. And of course, predictably, ultimately really what it comes down to is the reason I moved to New York when I did in 2006 had to do with a woman that became my first wife. Although it wasn't completely because of that. I mean, I'm a jazz musician. I'd always wanted to live in New York for a little bit. And the short version is that marriage didn't work out. Although it was a very, very friendly divorce, very low hassle, no rancor or anger, really, just was not right, you know.
Yeah.
But then I met my wife, Ariane, is a born and bred Upper West Sider. And so once that happened, I was like, oh, I guess I'm living in New York now. Although, interestingly, I don't know if you know this, I'm in California right now.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay.
My wife, despite what I just said, this is now some years down the road. Despite being a born and bred New Yorker, she, and we're very transparent about this. She has increasingly really severe issues with winter that are ultimately related to mental health and well-being. And so we're trying out we're living for half a year in the by Palm Springs, Palm Desert area of Southern California. So in fact, I'll tell you something weird. Where we live, literally across the street from me is the parking lot for the Coachella Festival. Coachella is going on right now.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a nice location.
If I walked outside right now, I could hear the stages, fortunately, are about a mile away. So it's not too loud here. But the traffic's really bad. It's it's like living next to a football stadium on game day, you know, right now. So I very carefully planned it that today I don't have to go anywhere. Because I did have to go someplace yesterday, and it was crazy trying to get back in here. But anyway, yes. So I met Kurt in 93, and we started touring in 95, and then we were kind of off to the races.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you know, I listened to the first CD I bought by Kurt was The Messenger. And you know, that's for me still, I think, my favorite CDs by Kurt. I don't know, because there's so much music going on there, and there's this one track that's kind of, he tells this story. I forgot the name of that track. It's like more a spoken word.
Spoken word thing, yeah. Like something about the thing at the side of the tracks and blah blah blah.
Yeah, and then Swing walks in, and you start swinging.
Yeah. So that was a spoken word thing that he wrote that was all it was anecdotal.
How did you approach those things? I wanted to ask you that because
it was anecdotal based on real people and characters that were in our sphere, or our you know, in our the social circle of people that were just part of Kurt becoming Kurt. You know, Kurt Kurt, let me just say, I mean, I think you know this or you've sensed this. Our parting was extremely non-amicable.
Mm.
We don't have any contact.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
That's mostly my. I think it's fair to say, I can't know for sure because we've never talked about it. And let's just say that, you know, on the one hand, our parting was so mean, the way that it happened, that it's just not, my personal philosophy includes the idea that, you know, I think people are soft, you know, and so they'll talk themselves out of what they think of as being, you know, overly harsh or whatever, because they just, and to me, I felt betrayed. And if somebody betrays me, then that's it, you know.
Yeah.
Like you made a choice. I could even maybe understand why you made that choice a little bit, you know, but you still did what you did. And so that's it for us. We're done, you know.
Yep.
So live with that because that's what you did. I don't think that's what he thought was going to happen because we had so much history. I think he thought that he could do what he did the way he did it. And certainly I'd be angry for a while, but that I'd eventually get over it and whatever. And all that means is it actually supports my position, which is that, you know, we worked together for 20 years, but apparently you didn't get to know me that well, because anybody that really knows me would know that if you did what you did, I mean, frankly, fine. From a business point of view, maybe that's what you need to do because there were certainly business reasons in it, business and personal. So do what you need to do, but you can't have your cake and eat it too, dude. You know, understand that if you do what you did the way that you did it, then don't expect to have any sort of relationship with me ever again. You know, that's just the way it is. So all that said, in the very beginning, you know, obviously it was a lot different. Kurt and I, he was like basically my best friend for a lot of years. And I watched him get married and I was an uncle to his kid. And that was one of the reasons that it's tragic that it had to be what it is. But that doesn't, you know, that, like when I said people are soft, I mean, you know, they don't want to be part of a tragic situation. And so they'll just like eat shit, pardon my French, and just put up with anything so as not to be tragic, you know? And I'm like, yeah, you know what? We survive tragedy. Bad shit happens. You move on, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
But this is not somebody that after 2013 that I was ever going to trust again. I won't believe anything you tell me, you know? So why even bother talking if I'm not going to believe anything you would say? But anyway, in the beginning, like the messenger,
I mean, that's really fresh, right? The communication.
Oh man, it was so cool what we were into at that point.
Yeah, that was the freshest Kurt's period for me. Like when I listened, you know, it's honest. I'll put it like that. Maybe that's the right word.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something interesting about that. You know, we were with Blue Note, and every time we would go play in New York, there was always an opportunity to go to the Blue Note office, and that's when Michael Kuskuna was still there, and of course Bruce Lundvall is there. And every time we went, we got to raid the CD bins and come away with like, I remember one time coming away with like, you know, 60 or 70 CDs, you know, and I'm like, wow, this is really great. So we would say to ourselves, you know, it's kind of too bad we don't live in New York because we could do this more often. And we had seen when we were there, the musicians that were on Blue Note that did live in New York would frequently stop by the office to hang out. Seemed like there were positive things about that. It kept them more in the immediate focus of the label and everything like that. But with time, what we realized was, And the evidence for this is, if you look at the 6 records we made for Blue Note, we didn't have a producer other than me and Kurt. And I think Bill Trout, who was the manager, got a production credit just for no real reason. But we didn't have an outside producer on any of those records. And the reason was because we weren't in New York, and because we kept getting Grammy nominations. So even though, you know, and I'll just tell you, this all dates back to the very beginning. We made the demo that became Close Your Eyes. And Bruce Lundvall heard it and signed Kurt very fast. And immediately a team started getting put together. Bill Trout was the manager, Lundvall and Kuskuna, and Tom Everett, who was the vice president in charge of marketing. And then the Ted Kurland agency out of Boston was the booking agency. And all of these industry heavies, we're talking about some really famous people. Sure. They thought that they had what they'd apparently been looking for, which was the male Diana Krall. You know, they had somebody that was going to sell a lot of records and be really big, really fast. Within the group, you know, I mean, Kurt came into his own and started being a leader, you know, and being authoritative pretty quickly. But at the beginning, I was the senior guy. You know, I'm like almost 7 years older than him. When we first started working together, at that point, I'd been in Chicago for 5 years. I was already what we call a made guy, you know, in Chicago scene. Nobody knew who he was, right? So I was not green by any standard musically, but in terms of major labels and touring and the business and everything like that, I was, you know, I hadn't been part of that stuff yet. Nonetheless, it became really apparent to me early on that, like I said, these guys thought they had the next, the male Diana Krall, you know, and so they were making all these plans based on that assumption, right? And I swear to God, I felt like saying, you know, all due respect, but have you guys listened to the record that we made? You know, then that's Close Your Eyes. That's the first one. From what I know, I just have a hard time imagining that, like, for instance, the metric then was if you sold 125,000 records within the first 6 months of release, then that was a hit. That was big, right? Sure. And of course, even in rock and roll or country music or R&B, those numbers are that's nothing. But in jazz, that's pretty impressive, right? You know. So I was like, you know, I'm proud of what we've done, but I don't think it's going to find the Diana Krall size audience anytime soon. But I didn't say anything because what am I going to tell that to Bruce Lundvall? This is Bruce Lundvall. This is Michael Kuskuna. These guys know what they're doing, right? Well, turns out they didn't know what they were doing at all. They thought it was going to be this big thing, and it just wasn't, you know. And so every subsequent record, we made The Messenger. Yeah. And musically, it was this really deep, interesting, amazing thing. But again, not something that a massive audience is going to glom onto. And so then the third record, which is
This Time It's Love, right? No, yeah.
It's probably my least favorite of all the records that we made. But it was an attempt to go a little bit in the direction that they wanted us to go in. But still, it wasn't, you know, full on commercial like that. And then we did the Live at the Green Mill record. And you know, that was what it was, right? And then we did what is actually my personal favorite.
Yeah, that's a good one. Flirting, yeah.
Flirting with Twilight.
Yeah.
That's my favorite record for probably obvious reasons because of all the writing. But the point is, every single one, after we made it, and after it didn't sell as well as they would have liked, there was always some conversation about, well, maybe for the next record we should get a producer. We should, you know, let's bring in somebody that can blah, blah, blah. But then it would get another Grammy nomination. And between that and the fact that we were in Chicago, not New York, they just kind of let us be, you know, they just kind of left us alone. And then when we moved the 4 records that we made for Concord, when I was still with him, it didn't really change that much, except for the first one. We had a rock and roll producer, Joe Ciccarelli, who was somebody that Kurt had gotten to know through the Recording Academy, because we were both very involved in the Recording Academy for a number of years. And that record has some nice things on it. I think it's very uneven. I don't like it that much either. But the point is, we worked with Chris Dunn, who's the head of A&R for Concord, and I think he figured out pretty early. He was there for the tracking on Night Moves, and I think he figured out these guys are best when they're just doing their thing, you know. Although I will say, the one time for the record The Gate, working with Don Was, that was amazing. He's the real deal. He's the real deal. Learned a lot working with Don, you know. But part of the reason that worked was because he still sort of let us do our thing, you know. We kind of tried to find a middle ground. We were insistent about that. And then maybe before I'll just stop talking about this, but I will just tell you, just for your reference, whatever Kurt's done since 2013, I haven't heard it.
Oh, wow, really? Interesting.
I mean, like, none of it. With the only exception being occasionally I'll hear like 8 bars of something. If somebody's playing the radio or backstage somewhere, or, you know, whatever, I've heard a little bit. So it's admittedly subjective when I say that, mainly because it's all based on what people tell me. That the interestingness of his material, it just like went like that, you know. So I guess I'm just saying, you know, trying to have some credibility while still saying, you know, that's part of why it was so tragic. We were doing really interesting work, musical work, and there are some specific reasons why I was increasingly not happy in the situation. And that's a whole different sticky wicket to get into that stuff, which I kind of prefer not to do. But but you know, it was headed in a not good direction, but I still thought it was solvable, you know. And then after a very successful weekend at Birdland, I've compared it many times to a marriage, and I have no problem casting myself as the wife, you know, who knows that there are issues, but remembers, you know, we made that promise, and we will figure this out. We'll work it out. Whereas the whole time the husband is thinking, yeah, at the first really convenient opportunity, I am jettisoning this woman. And that's what happened, you know. It was a total surprise to me. And it was very abrupt, and it was mean. And I'm like, okay, well, so that's it. which is why I haven't. But so I guess part of the reason I wanted to tell you that is just to say, after 20 years, many of which we were on the road over 200 nights a year, and we made all those records.
Crazy.
After what happened in 2013, I just don't need to hear that voice.
Oh, I get you. After that,
No, I just don't need to hear it.
Sure. Yeah.
Which means I not only haven't heard anything that he's done, but I don't listen to the records we made either.
Okay.
But I don't have a like for instance, I frequently use things that we made as examples in my class. So I don't go into some sort of, it doesn't give me the heebie-jeebies to hear it, because see, then that would be all screwed up too. I earned the right to listen to that music and be proud of it, because I wrote all that stuff and played all that stuff and produced those records, you know. So for me to have some sort of a panic attack when that comes up would be shooting myself in the foot. It would just be, you know. But really the only time I listen to that stuff is when I'm teaching, and I use it as examples, because it just helps the credibility with the students, frankly, you know. It's hard to get through to young people these days, and if they know that, well, you want a Grammy for doing the thing you're playing for me, then that gets their attention, right?
Absolutely. You know? Yeah, I know what you mean. No, but that's why I said before, you know, like for me, The Messenger is still, and it's 32 years old, I think. So it's, that explains a lot, right? I mean, but it's just like I said, it's so much, it's musical, it's not commercial. It's just like, it's not commercial, actually. It's really. It
was very influenced by the whole Ed Peterson thing, too. And I'm not sure how much you know about that, but
the Green Mill thing, right? And
Green Mill Monday Night.
Yeah.
And I was in that band with the original bass player for Kurt, Rob Amster, who sadly died from alcoholism. And that band, the Chicago guitarist Fareed Haq, you no doubt.
Sure, I know Fareed. Yeah, sure.
Who Fareed is. So he was in the Ed band when I first joined it, and a great drummer named Jim Widlowski, who's on some tracks on The Messenger, including the title track, which was an Ed Peterson tune.
Yeah.
So, and it was on that Monday night gig. That's really where I first met Kurt.
Okay.
So Ed had gotten to know him in a more commercial musical situation, weekend wedding orchestra kind of thing, and invited him to come to the Green Mill and sit in. And that's when we met. So The Messenger is very, very influenced by that Monday night Green Mill scene with Ed Peterson.
Explains a lot, Explains a lot, yeah. Just the chemistry and
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that record. I mean, especially the band is like, I listened to that spoken word. I have to recheck the title, but that spoken word thing, it sounds like an improv, but it's like the Pinsky thing, you know. It's arranged in such a good fashion that it sounds so musical, and the band is like, ooh, incredible stuff, you know, just beautiful. But Laurence, I'll just make a detour from the highway to some other.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about your story with Charlie Hayden, and you know,
that was
work with one of the greats. Like, how did that happen, actually? And
it happened because the British label that the Union Trio stuff is on, NAIM, NAIM.
Yep.
So the connection to that label was a guy who's one of my very best friends in Chicago named Ken Christensen. Ken owns what I would argue is like probably the last real hi-fi store in Chicago, and has owned it for a bunch of years. And in the 70s, Ken started making, he's one of these audiophile purist guys in terms of just sound.
Yeah.
He is not obnoxious. He's the opposite of obnoxious. He's a very humble, unassuming guy that's got ears. He's one of those weird phenomenon or phenomena. He's somebody that has ears a lot of musicians would kill for, but he himself has no musical talent. So he is a listener. And so he started making direct stereo live recordings with a Nagra 2-track reel-to-reel recorder and a matched pair of AKG 414 microphones. And for instance, my favorite one, he's got a recording from the Jazz Showcase from, like, I want to say 1978 or something like that, of Charlie and Pat Metheny and Billy Higgins trio.
Oh, man.
It's just
kind of rejoicing, that trio, kind of
off the chain ridiculous.
Is this out? It's not out, right? It's not published, this, right?
No.
Oh, shit, man.
But Ken formed a relationship with Name because he had his stereo store, and he became very enamored of their equipment. He felt like it was the best, just the best. And he got to know the founder of the company was a guy named Julian Wertico, who was an engineer, and he was working with tube technology in the late 50s, and basically came to believe that solid state could be just as warm and rewarding and open sounding, but you needed to do it right. You needed to design it right. You needed to use literally like all the best ingredients, like gold wiring and stuff that's super pure in the equipment. And so that's how Name got founded. Ken had become friends with Julian. And at one point, Julian said, you know, nobody's putting out audiophile recordings on compact disc. The small amount of audiophile recordings that are put out they're all vinyl still. Yeah. And so I wonder if we could do that. Well, then it turns out that his friend Ken in Chicago has been making the very kind of recordings that he's talking about as a hobby for, at that point, 20, 25 years, right?
Incredible, yeah.
And because of doing that, that's how he had become friends with Charlie.
Ah, okay.
So the connection to Charlie was through Ken and through Name, which of course is the label that issued that record. Man, it was just a great experience. Charlie was wonderful. You know, I've heard, so you probably have too, stories about him, sort of pain in the ass, or, you know, very sensitive. I flew out. We had talked on the phone about repertoire. I flew out, went to his house. We had a listening session, talked more about repertoire, and then we went to a Cal Arts and recorded for 2 days. And it was just, you know, it was magical.
Yeah. I mean, just to play with, you know. Yeah.
Well, and you know what's really special about that? He's playing his Viome bass on that recording, because that was at the point where he had stopped traveling with that bass.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't tour with that bass anymore. So the only time you got to hear that bass was if he was recording or doing a concert in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
And thank God, because of related to that, the Steinway piano that I was playing on at Cal Arts had recently been completely rebuilt and refurbished, because many 9-foot grands that have not been properly maintained over the years would, even though it's a 9-foot Steinway maybe, or a 9-foot Yamaha, or a 9-foot Fazioli or whatever, but it needs to be in tip-top shape.
Yep.
For its sound to stand up to a bass like that.
Yeah, it's huge, yeah.
Because obviously Charlie's playing without amplification. You know, it's just the sound of that bass in this amazing room. And Ken would position the microphones just exactly in the right place, so that, for instance, the piano's not louder than the bass. Or when we recorded the Union Trio records, he would set up so that Paul was the furthest away from the mics, so that you have an even sound, because it's not mixed. It's just the sound that the mics are picking up. And Ken even had they made, we needed some sort of headphone monitor, because the problem is that when we would set up and when we did those recordings, the drums,
it's too far,
are 40 feet away from me at the piano. So at that point, you actually have latency issues in the room. We couldn't hook up. So Name designed special little headphone preamp monitor deals for us, so that we could hear the sound that was going to the tape, not the sound in the room.
In the room, yeah.
Which was the only way that would work with the Union Trio. But then the room we were in at Cal Arts was very nice acoustically. It was a combination rehearsal room and recording studio, fairly large room, and because there were no drums, Charlie and I were set up fairly close to each other. I certainly didn't have any trouble hearing him. That was just one of the great experiences, man.
Oh man, it's a dream recording. I mean, it's just, just I think every note choice is the right one.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say.
It's really man, there are many bass and piano duos out there, but I think this one is quite under the radar, probably. I don't know.
Because I think it really is. Well, not long after that, Charlie made a duet record with Keith.
Oh shit! Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but
I know what you mean. Yeah,
duet record, and just because it's Keith Jarrett, that people know about that record.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I like ours better.
If it's Keith, doesn't necessarily mean it's. I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I'm a huge Keith.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
Huge.
Yeah, what's the name of that record? Yeah, I know what you mean. It's an okay record actually, but it's not huge. Yeah.
It's not special,
It's not special. Yeah. It's just two legends playing. Okay. Yeah.
And this will be like a weird example, but Charlie. I mean, he was an eccentric guy a little bit. I mean, he was, I think he was probably very loyal. Okay. To people that he'd known all his life. But the reason I tell you that is because once we knew we were going to do this, actually the first time it wasn't the first time I met him in person, but it was the first time he would remember that we had met, if I could put it that way. He was playing at the Blue Note in New York, and he was playing with Paul Bley.
Wow.
And so I went down to see the gig because it had been set up that I was going to meet Charlie officially, because we were going to be making this record together. So this gig with Paul Bley was really weird. And this is an Emperor's Clothes thing, if you know what I mean by that. I was just sitting there and I'm like, this guy can't play anymore. And this is one of my soapboxes, which is this instrument is very, very demanding. Okay. So I don't care who you are. I've heard Herbie when he was really more of the electric phase and playing all his funky keyboards and stuff like that. I've heard him play acoustic piano where, I mean, he's still Herbie. Okay.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I know what it's like when I hear somebody's ideas not quite connecting. Like you have to practice this instrument. You can't rest on your laurels with this instrument. You got to keep your shit up to date. You have to practice. And that night at the Blue Note, I'm listening to Paul Bley play, and I'm like, and the crowd that night, they're just, that's why the Emperor's Clothes analogy. They're like, well, I know it's brilliant because it's Paul Bley and Charlie Hayden, so it has to be brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going, no, I don't think so, not so much.
Yep.
And Charlie would never admit, I think, that he was sort of, tolerating the situation because he had held Paul in such high esteem, and they had this history together and everything like that. They'd known each other for so many years, but it just was not good.
Sure, but Paul could be like that. I remember saw him live like once or two times when I was like, oh, you know,
Right.
yeah. And I'm a huge fan of Paul's music. I mean, Paul Blaze, but
listen to like Floater Syndrome or whatever, and you're like, man, that's
yeah,
amazing,
but
you know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you got to sound good today in order
absolutely,
to sound good today.
absolutely, yeah,
You can't sound good today just because you sounded good 20 years ago.
exactly, absolutely, man, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Lawrence, not to take too much of your time, I wanted to ask you, like, what's happening for you this year and touring wise, playing wise, record wise. The last record I heard by you as a leader was Tesetera, which is a beautiful record. And uh, are you preparing something new, or is something happening there?
Yes, actually, I'm going into the studio later this month.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
I've got two things that I'm really excited about, two collaborations, and let me try to be as diplomatic as I can here. They're both with singers that are each in their own way the radical exception to what working with most singers is like.
Mm.
They are both hyper intelligent and musically intellectual in a formalized way. They are both notational. One of them is the daughter of the trombonist Steve Turre.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Named
Interesting.
Andromeda Turre.
Oh, wow.
And as if having him for a dad wasn't enough, her mom, who's a very interesting person, is a cellist and a composer, mostly kind of a 20th century-ish composer. So Andromeda actually does write music in like notation. She's, you know, she knows theory, and we don't have record dates yet, but I did a bunch of arrangements for her, and we did perform them. I think it was even early December or November, shortly before we left to drive out here, and had a great gig. And I know that'll go in the studio at one point, at some point. We just don't have that on the thing yet, on the schedule.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I'm involved in, different singer, is a tenor vocalist named Ben Jones. Now, Ben, this gets into a very interesting conversation, I think. Ben is not a jazz singer. He's a classically trained, meaning he's got opera chops if he needs to, but he went in more of the musical theater direction as a general thing. But you know the group Chanticleer?
No.
You should check it out.
Okay.
It's an all male a cappella vocal group.
Write it down.
It's sort of on the same. I think of them, as being they're a little bit more modern than the King Singers, but they're serious.
Okay.
They're very serious, and to do the stuff that they do, you have to be musically literate. You have to, Ben went to music school. So our collaboration, and we're going into the studio up at Skywalker 3 days, the last 3 days of the month. Ben is really into doing, one of the things I got known for when I was still with Kurt was sort of modernizing the songbook and starting to include Stevie Wonder and Carole King and Burt Bacharach. And the thing that I so often say in clinics or workshops or whatever, or even if it's just a band playing and I'm addressing the audience, I'll say, when Bird and Diz played the music of Gershwin and Cole Porter and Jerome Kern and Harold Arlen, they were taking popular music of a recent
Absolutely.
era and turning it in. So why not do that with Burt Bacharach and Sting and Paul Simon and, you know, all the, I mean, there's some great songs, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So most of the repertoire that Ben and I are doing is coming from that direction. But, and this is getting back to what I said about, it's an interesting thing about, is he a jazz singer or is he not? Because what we do, it's just a duo, which means I'm totally free. So we only have a couple of actually notated arrangements. One of them is, you know, the musical theater composer Adam Gettle?
No.
Wrote Light in the Piazza. Really, there's a couple. I'm not much of a musical fan.
No, me neither. That's why. So.
And part of the reason is that Leonard Bernstein ruined everything else for me with West Side Story, which I you know, it's brilliant. It's freaking amazing. But then you compare that to Andrew Lloyd Webber or whatever, and it's just, you know, kiddie time, right?
Yep.
But there are a couple of people. There's a guy named Jason Robert Brown who writes very interesting stuff. But this guy, Adam Gettle, wrote a musical. I think his best known musical is called Light in the Piazza. And it's like classical musical theater music. It's very challenging to sing and to play. It's not for the faint of heart at all. It's quite sophisticated. So there's one piece that we're doing that's that, and there's one notated arrangement that's something I did for a different singer of a Bee Gees tune. Everything else that we're doing are kind of arrangements or approaches to the songs that we're doing that we came up with just
on
by
the spot,
ear.
kind of, yeah.
But the point is, basically, we play the head, and then when Ben reaches the end of the melody or whatever and drops out, I don't stick to the form of the tune. I don't even necessarily stay in the key. I do whatever.
Yeah.
Which means I'm going to places that most singers would be like,
Yeah.
you know, and Ben is so smart musically that he's totally into this. And of course, I always find a way to come back to the song and dial it back in. And he's always right there. He always enters just exactly. I set him up and boom, he's right there. So this is why I said it's interesting, because it's like, what really makes a jazz singer? I mean, first of all, you have to take my word for it. This guy's voice is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Just technically and frankly in a way that most jazz singers really fail spectacularly on this particular issue. And I learned a little bit about it because of my wife, who is a musical theater singer, amongst other things, and knows about this stuff. Let's just leave it at that. But most singers do not really know how to resonate, especially their back. They've got a lot of body that they could be using, and they don't. Some of it's all here, or it's like here. Some of them get down to here a little bit, but not much, you know. When Ben sings, his whole body is resonating. So his intonation, and for somebody that's not strictly a jazz singer, his elasticity of phrasing, ability, which you would assume that if the other thing I told you, which is that no matter where I go, he can follow. So the only way in which he's not a jazz singer is really in the department of stylistic considerations as conventionally defined. But, you know, after having spent a good part of my career dealing with jazz singers, some of them supposed jazz singers, you know, but if the typical singer that has, and let's just be diplomatic here, for reasons that are understandable due to the nature of having your instrument be actually part of your body, but the level of incuriousness about what they're doing. You know, if you
Mm-hmm.
ask, okay, the line that you just sang, what beat did you enter on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What,
Yeah. Like
what was the
basic stuff.
intervallic distance between the third and the fourth notes you sang? They can't even begin to answer those questions, which from an instrumentalist point of view is like, wait a minute, you don't know, you literally don't know what you're doing,
Sure.
which means 100% instinct and no intelligence as we define that, other than an intuitive intelligence, which is valid. Intuitive intelligence is valid, but it's very narrow, you know. So anyway, all that to say, I'm starting to think that Ben maybe is more of a jazz singer than people would say based on the usual criteria, because he never gets lost. He sounds amazing. And the particular show that we're doing, we think that it can be pretty marketable because all the songs are very recognizable to people. It's not jazz, but especially because of all the crazy shit that I'm doing, you know, it's very much of a jazz approach to that material. It's totally spontaneous. There's no script. It's different every time. I make this joke that my motto is never the same way once.
Yeah.
And that's our approach. That's what we do. It's always different, including the parts that he sings. And so anyway, yeah, so so we're recording the last 3 days of this month, and you know, we're going to issue that somehow. We'll probably issue it independently. We've talked about it. Don't really see much point in going with a label these days.
Sure. Yeah.
End up losing control and
absolutely
and money, you know. So that's what I'm involved in. And meanwhile, I'll just say out here, I've been delighted the amount of teaching I'm doing. I got to be careful about how I word this, because I don't mean to disrespect anybody. And also socially and socio-politically, I understand why things are the way that they are. And I actually support things being the way that they are. But the fact of the matter is that in the New York scene, a 65-year-old white jazz pianist who is thought of, for better or worse, as being a sort of a well-known sideman for somebody that they haven't worked with now for 15 years or whatever it is. You know, when you put that together with the fact that my approach is still very lyrical based, you know, I'm not the whole math jazz thing.
Yeah, sure.
I respect it, you know, even though you come away from listening to certain artists and you're really impressed with what they did, but you're not, there's no memory, there's no, you're not humming something, you know, there's nothing, there's nothing catchy that you've heard. But that's kind of what's popular in New York these days. And that's not what I do, you know. So being out here, even just for the short time I've been here, I've got like 7 students a week. I'm doing a workshop every week. I'm turning down gigs. And all of a sudden I'm starting to say to myself, you know, maybe
why not?
Maybe the kind of the big fish in the small pond thing isn't so bad after all, you know. Because as artists these days, the cards are stacked against us anyway. And absolutely. I've lived for almost 20 years in the, you know, obviously the home of jazz more than any other city in the world is New York. And I've had successful gigs there. I've got a great trio. I've got an amazing drummer and bass player there. And when I do record a trio record, hopefully next year, those are the guys I'll use.
They're great.
Jared Schoening and Matthew Clohessy. It's the people on Tessitera. Those are my guys. I love playing with those guys. It's my favorite trio I've ever had. So I'll keep ties to New York, but this is nice. I have to say, almost unexpected to be as busy and in demand. And it's like, wow, it hadn't been like this for a long time, you know? So it's cool. I like it. And of course, being in the temperatures in the 80s in February doesn't suck either.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The quality of life, that's important, man. I mean, it's beautiful. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to all the new records. I'll try to find them and check them out, or send me a link when it's out so that I'll check it out too.
I will. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll send you the concert that Ben and I did in Chicago over the Christmas holiday got recorded.
Oh, please. I'd love to hear that.
And so we've got we have a GoFundMe page up. I'm not asking for a donation. With mostly wealthy supporters and friends are donating to that. That campaign's going well. But the GoFundMe page has some track excerpts on it, and you can hear Ben's voice.
I'll try to check them out. Yeah, I'll send me a link, please.
That link. Yeah. I'll send you that link as soon as we get done.
Fantastic. Lawrence, I'll leave you a nice sunny afternoon then in on the west coast of the States, and thanks for sharing some of these thoughts, man. I really appreciate it. Really nice.
I appreciate your interest, and at some point, I would love to hear.
I'll send you some links.
The same story from you. I mean, I know a little bit about you, but I'm sure you have just as interesting of a story as I do. So
probably, yeah. And if you're ever in Europe, just drop me a line. You know, we'll just come over and hopefully we get to meet.
Where do you live? Because you're from Slovenia, right?
Yeah, I'm in Slovenia. I'm like 2 hours south of Vienna. Kind of to get the idea, sure. Like 1 hour north of Zagreb in Croatia, and 2 hours west of Budapest. So kind of that triangle.
Got it. Right.
Kind of there. So if you're ever around here, just let me know. We have a guest from here. You know, we can hang. I can show you around. So
cool. Love it. I'd love to do that.
You know,
vibes player, Richie Sanislo, is that his name?
Oh, don't know him. No, don't know him.
We've been talking about doing some stuff. This is the next thing I know of that might actually bring me over there. So.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Let me know if you're gonna in Europe. Let's get together, and we live in a white wine region. So if you like white wine, that's the place.
I like it. I like it because it's wine.
Exactly. But no, cool, man. I'll send you a link when this is out, and I'll let you know. And send me links when the albums come out and everything. So
I will. All right, Samo. Thank you. Thank you very much.